I'll now invite our chief guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Honorable Member of Parliament, to deliver his inaugural address, please.
President of the All India Ophthalmological Society, Dr. N.S.T. Raju, former President Dr. A.K. Grover, our guest of honor, Dr. K. Mohandas, distinguished doctors on the dais and off the dais. There's so many distinguished doctors in the audience, I realize. Ladies and gentlemen, namaskaram and welcome to my home state of Kerala. Good to see you all here this evening. I must say that when I was invited to make this address, I did wonder, why me? In fact, a friend of mine said, what on earth are you going to say to ophthalmologists? And I had to explain to him that in my UN career, one learned to speak to audiences about almost anything. I remember on one occasion being invited on a particularly bad mobile telephone line to deliver a speech on, I thought, press freedom. And I got to the event and discovered I was supposed to speak on breastfeeding. But you know, at the United Nations, we take all these things in stride. However, ophthalmology is maybe one leap a bit too far. So I want to assure those of you who are dreading my words of wisdom on your subject that I don't intend to inflict any of that on you. In fact, I tend, you remember we lost the late Elizabeth Taylor last year, and I tend to belong to the Elizabeth Taylor School of Public Speaking. As Elizabeth Taylor said to her husbands, I shall not keep you long. I would prefer instead to offer you a few thoughts and let you get on with your conference. But I do want to say that I'm delighted that the All India Conference of Ophthalmology is taking place in my home state, that you are gathering here in such large and impressive numbers to review the state of the field, to update your own knowledge and awareness, and of course to honor the lifetime achievements of two such remarkable individuals as Dr. Badrinath and Dr. Shukla, whom we have just honored this evening. To me, it is a true pleasure to be in the company of such eminent individuals and to see you all here as professionals committed to your own professional improvement as you leave this conference. In wondering, though, what I should speak to you about, it struck me that the one thing that all of you are obviously obsessed with in your professional lives is vision. And I wondered whether vision is indeed what we are not collectively lacking in many ways as a nation. What is the vision of India that brought me back to this country after so many years abroad and has left me doing my very best to serve an ideal of a land that so many of us, I think 90% of you, are fellow Indians? What exactly should that vision be, and what has it been for me? Well, clearly there are a couple of things worth talking about as one articulates a vision of India. The first is the extraordinary diversity and pluralism of our land, reflected in the delegates present here today. I wrote some years ago that the singular thing about India is that you can only speak of it in the plural. Everything, as you know, exists in countless variants. There is no fixed stereotype, no one way of doing things. It's a land which in many ways is a great adventure, a land where everything is possible, where everything can be pursued in different ways. Indeed, Winston Churchill, in talking about India, in rejecting the claim for Indian independence, said, India is no more a united country than the equator. Well, Churchill was rarely right about India. But it's true that, of course, we represent a land which has the most astonishing diversity within it, with 23 languages recognized in the Constitution, 22,000 dialects that the ethnographers study, with enormous variations of topography and climate, with extraordinary differences of ethnicity, of religion, of caste and creed. Indeed, in talking about our diversity abroad, I often find myself telling Americans, for example, that while they may call themselves a melting pot, where people of various corners of the globe get together in one society and melt into a homogenized American, in India we're not a melting pot. We have preserved our distinct identities. We are instead a thali. We are a collection of different dishes in different bowls. And because we are in different bowls, we don't always flow into the next. But we belong together on that one plate. And we combine on your palate to give you a satisfying repast. That is the India that I think we're all proud to belong to. It's an India where you can really assume that you can overcome differences of caste, creed, color, culture, cuisine, custom and costume, and for that matter, conviction, and still rally around a consensus. Because in a rich, dramatically diverse democracy like ours, it doesn't really matter if you don't agree all the time, so long as you agree on the ground rules of how you will disagree. That is how we have preserved our successes. The disagreements you see in our parliament, in our streets, in the elections that are taking place these days, in the Supreme Court judgments that have made the news today, all of this is part of a democracy built on ground rules that actually bring us, our nation, trying to move forward, trying to unite people of various backgrounds together in an effective and common cause. At the same time, we are a land of paradoxes. The paradoxes that I tried to briefly summarize for you, and many others. In fact, given that my desire is to be brief, I will summarize them in one image that went around the internet a few years ago that perhaps many of you received in your junk emails. And that was an image from the Kumbh Mela, an image, a photograph taken of a Hindu holy man, a sadhu, a typical naked holy man right out of Hollywood central casting, if you like, matted hair, ash-smeared forehead, Rudraksha mala around his neck, gaps in his teeth, warts on his face, a naked holy man who might otherwise have been considered a picture of timeless otherworldliness. But in this photograph, this wonderful naked sadhu was chatting away on a mobile phone. This is India. And this India in which a naked holy man at one of the most ancient religious festivals can, in fact, be seen talking on a 21st century telephone instrument. That is the India for which all of us, I believe, must both recognize and strive. At the same time, our vision must embrace the extraordinary transformations of our economy that we have seen in the last 6.5 decades since independence. Today, we are poised to become the world's third largest economy in purchasing power terms. For those of you who understand these numbers and are surprised by my saying that, because we all know that Japan is the third largest economy with a GDP of 4.06 trillion, whereas India's economy is only 1.3 trillion. The fact is, however, that in purchasing power parity terms, that number converts to above 4 trillion, very close to the Japanese number. And whereas Japan, in the wake of the Fukushima disaster, the earthquake, the tsunami, and so on, will not grow in this fiscal year, when the numbers come in for India on the 31st of March, we will have grown, even by the most pessimistic projections, at least 6.9%. And so in purchasing parity terms, we will be the world's third largest economy after the US and China. It's an extraordinary distinction, and it's all the more surprising because for the first 4 decades after independence, we suffered from what I call the economics of nationalism, where our leaders, instead of integrating India into the global economy, in reaction to the impoverishment of our country under British colonial rule, subtracted us from that system, threw up the protectionist barriers, made self-reliance the mantra, put bureaucrats on the commanding heights of our economy instead of business people. And we spent 4 decades, more than 4 decades arguably, subsidizing unproductivity, regulating stagnation, and trying really to distribute poverty. Which only goes to show that one of the lessons you learn from history is that history can sometimes teach you the wrong lessons. And we've moved on from there. In the last 20 years, we have shot up from the so-called Hindu rate of growth of under 3% to well over 8% in many years, even during the global recession. We have each year pulled 1% of our population from below the poverty line to above it. I'm not going to just talk about per capita figures. We all know that statistics can be misleading. If Mukesh Ambani walked into this conference, our per capita income in this room would all go up. But if he left, we would not be feeling any richer in our wallets. So per capita income figures can be misleading. But what our Planning Commission has found is that every year, about 1%, last year was 0.78% of our population crossed the poverty line threshold. So even while our population has been going up every year, our poverty numbers have been dropping. And this is no small achievement. Indeed, in the 12th five-year plan, which we'll be launching at the end of March, our government confidently predicts, or our Planning Commission confidently predicts, a 9% rate of growth. And it's not impossible because for the last 5 years we have been averaging over 8%. McKinsey, the global consultancy, says we'll have 525 million middle-class people by 2025. I'm afraid this is going to be more competition for the ophthalmologists, but also more clients, since they will all be able to afford to pay your rather stiff bills. With all of this, our economy has been growing, and there is increasing talk about the innovations coming out of our country. I launched in Toronto a few months ago an Indian Institute of Innovation at the University of Toronto. And the buzzword that people are talking about abroad is innovation. Indian innovation is now becoming something that people conjure with. And I hope there's somebody sitting in this room who's going to come up with an ophthalmological innovation that does something that all of you want to do and does it much more cheaply than can currently be done by the equipment you purchase from the West. All of this is the good news, but at the same time, there are huge challenges. Our poverty still persists. We have perhaps 260 to 300 million people who are living below the Indian poverty line, which has been drawn, frankly, barely this side of the funeral pyre. It's not the UN World Bank poverty line of $1.25 a day. That's 75 rupees a day. By that figure, 70% of India would live behind and below the world's poverty line. It is our own much more modest poverty line, and even there are people living in conditions that all of us can't imagine. And that's why I'm so pleased that your society has gone out of its way to work so hard in providing services to the poor, in doing what is absolutely essential to serve and treat the poor of our country. And yet we know that when I speak of paradoxes, the paradoxes extend to the healthcare facilities of our country. That we can talk about Bollywood being the largest film industry in the world, 4 times the size of Hollywood, but there are perhaps 15 million Indians who can't enjoy a Bollywood movie because they are blind. And they are blind largely for preventable reasons, as Dr. Grover and I were just discussing at the podium. I know that you're making an effort to treat them, to treat childhood blindness, to prevent blindness in others. Those efforts need to be expanded so that we can drop that number significantly, and we will not want to live with the disgrace of being the country with the largest number of blind people in the world, which we are today. We also know that we produce perhaps the world's most widely sold and recognized generic medication for the treatment of illnesses like AIDS and TB, and yet 3 million of our own sufferers from HIV can't afford that treatment because of their abysmal poverty levels. Or that there are perhaps 350 million people in India who do not have a healthcare center, even a primary healthcare center, within 10 kilometers of their place of residence. 10 kilometers. Can you imagine if there is a serious illness, how they're going to get medical attention? These are all the sorts of challenges we still have to face. And any gathering of doctors, focused as you are on your patient's eyes, cannot afford to exclude a vision that embraces those who have been left out of the vision of those who have built the India of today. As I said, we need to overcome huge problems of hardware of this nation, if I can use a computer terminology. The roads, the ports, the railways, the infrastructure of our country is in many places in abysmal shape and needs serious remedial action. but equally important is the software of our people, the human capital, giving our people opportunities to take advantage of this success story I've summarized for you today. In fact, in some ways we have both good news and bad news with our youth, because 65% of our population is under 35. And that means we will have a youthful, dynamic, productive, working age population at a time when the rest of the world, including China, is aging. But they will only be an effective instrument of India's success if we are able to give them training, give them education, so they can take advantage of these opportunities that the 21st century offers, and if we can grow our economy sufficiently to offer them jobs and opportunities. Otherwise, the alternative that stares us in the face is what we can see with the Maoist insurrections in 165 districts of our 602 districts. Young men, mainly tribals, who feel they have nothing to lose by picking up the gun, who feel they have no stake in the success story of India, of the Indian economy. We cannot leave them out of our vision, because in fact there is nothing more dangerous to any society than large numbers of unemployed young men who believe they have nothing to lose. And yet, if we can bring them into the story, what a wonderful, wonderful story we will be able to tell. Dr. Manmohan Singh was telling our Congress MPs, I was first elected just 2.5 years ago, and sitting in the Central Hall of Parliament for the first time, I heard our Prime Minister say, we won a lot of votes from young people in this election, and he said, we must never forget to respect the impatience of the young. What a wonderful thought from a then 78-year-old Prime Minister. The impatience of the young is in so many ways what our society must heed. Our young want change, they want progress, and they see around the world, as you see, through your eyes and through your expertise, they see the higher standards that India can aspire to. They see that we are a nation that in some respects matches the world's best, and I believe your profession can hold its own with the best that the world has to offer. But in so many other areas, we see either that we lag seriously behind what we as Indians should be entitled to expect from our own people, or that we attain those standards and still all too often lapse, as we've seen with our cricket team in Australia. There is a tendency perhaps for us to be too quickly complacent with our successes in some areas. We need to strive, we need to persist. Otherwise, we will never be able to accomplish that consistent, sustained excellence that all of you in your lifetime work as doctors always strive for and manage to attain. So, I said I would keep this brief, and I will. At the end of this conference, you will all leave better equipped to give your patients better eyes. But what is the India they will see through those eyes? That is the question that I have asked you today in my remarks. I hope it will be an India that meets the expectations of Indians for the very best, because we are entitled to the best in this country. I hope it is an India that delivers decent 2, if not 3, decent square meals to all its population, that gives its people food, clothing, shelter from the rain and the heat, that provides them opportunities to educate themselves, to find decent work in our society and economy, and to genuinely strive for a better future for their children. An India, in other words, that fulfills the vision that I've sketched to you, a vision that takes into account the enormous potential of our people, the great richness of our diversity, that frees and liberates the creative energies of our people to innovate, to produce better for all our nation, and at the same time that does so in a democratic space in which every Indian believes that he or she will have a stake, that he or she can work in peace for better lives for themselves and for their communities. This is the India that is my vision. I congratulate all of you for your vision and for what you have done to give vision to others and to India. May you have a very successful conference. Thank you for listening to me. Jai Hind.